The first sound on the courthouse steps wasn't her voice. It was the slap that told the city it had picked the wrong woman. The first sound wasn't her voice. It was the crack of a palm against skin. Officer Rogelio Trent had Catherine Nelson by the jaw, fingers digging into her cheek as if silence could be forced into a face. "You think the rules don't apply because you dressed for the cameras?" he hissed. His hand snapped sideways. The echo climbed the marble columns and came back colder. Catherine's black handbag slid from her wrist and landed soft against the courthouse step. She didn't scramble for it. She crossed her arms over the curve of her stomach and looked past Trent, past the ring of navy sleeves and brass badges, to the tall doors that were supposed to mean justice. The red of her dress didn't flare. It settled, like a warning light that never blinks. Officer Jimmy Cornell locked a hand around her forearm. "Screening. Now, don't make this a scene." Behind them, two more uniforms paused, unsure whether to watch or film. Foot traffic slowed. Phones arose anyway. Catherine didn't plead. She didn't spit back. She inhaled through her nose, as if measuring the size of the building against the size of the moment. On the lintel, the county crest glinted, a blindfolded figure with scales. She studied it the way some people read a clock. Have you ever seen a courthouse teach itself what power really looks like? Inside, the air changed. Trent brushed his sleeves smooth, straightened his duty belt, and walked like a man heading to a promotion. Cornell followed, steering Catherine as if she were a problem on wheels. They delivered her to a side room and then to a desk, where a clerk pushed a form forward without lifting her eyes. "Your Honor," Trent said later, voice perfectly level before Judge Harding, "we initiated routine security protocols when we observed a subject attempting to enter a restricted wing. The subject refused to present identification and became agitated. For her safety and ours, we placed her briefly in protective custody." He did not mention the open-handed strike. He did mention a concerning handbag. Contents included papers that looked like legal filings, possible fraud, possible theft. Cornell kept his tone grave. She elevated. Profanity and threats. My partner displayed restraint. The judge nodded, fascinated by the paperwork. The stenographer's keys kept pace, recording every cleanly packaged sentence. Two uniforms from the lobby, summoned for corroboration, offered identical phrasing about non-compliance. When the judge asked about body-worn footage, Trent didn't blink. "Camera error this morning. Technical is already notified." Across the hall, a young clerk pressed her palms to the counter, eyes tracking the intake name she had just typed. Catherine Nelson. She wasn't sure why her stomach cooled, only that it did. And across the street, behind a tinted windshield that reflected the courthouse columns like a row of white spears, a man in a charcoal suit slid off his sunglasses and watched the door that had swallowed his wife. The record now contained a story. It just wasn't the right one. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us keep these stories alive. And trust me, the best part is yet to come. Now, let's get back to it. Morning arrives like a verdict, bright, unavoidable, and cold enough to make breath look honest. Sunlight pours down the courthouse facade, turning the fluted columns to ivory spears, and the marble steps to a stage no one asked to stand on. Catherine Nelson takes them one measured stride at a time, a crimson silk dress moving with her like a tide. One hand balances a black handbag, the other rests lightly over the gentle arc of her stomach. She is early, as always. She is prepared, as always. It should take 20 minutes, an affidavit, a signature, a clerk's practiced nod. The doors inhale and exhale a steady stream of jurors, attorneys, and citizens with calendars. Someone holds a latte too tight. Someone's tie is loose and already losing. The building is busy, but not yet human. It hasn't decided which faces to care about. "Ma'am," a voice snaps from the shadow of the vestibule, more command than greeting. Officer Rogelio Trent steps from the security post like he owns the morning. Short sleeves strain against gym-grown arms, jaw set at a permanent verdict. To his right, Officer Jimmy Cornell scans the line, eyes dull with a man who's memorized the wrong parts of his job. They've turned the lobby into a checkpoint, belt stanchions, extra scanners, and a sign that reads heightened security in letters thick enough to shout. Catherine stops with dignified patience. "Good morning," she says, offering her bag for the tray. Trent doesn't take it. His gaze travels from the crown of her braided hair to the sweep of red cloth, as if fabric could be an argument. "Screening's closed to public entries through the front. You'll use the side lot. I have a 9 o'clock hearing." Her voice is even, the kind that diffuses small problems before they learn to walk. "This is the public entrance." He smirks at the word public, like it's an insult. "Not for people trying to bypass procedures." Cornell shifts to her other side, close enough to count eyelashes. "Where's your pass?" he asks. The tone suggests there won't be a right answer. "In my bag," Catherine says, "and in your system." She begins to open the handbag. Trent catches her wrist with a rough hand and squeezes, not enough to leave marks he can't explain, enough to rewrite the air around them. "Bag stays shut," he says. "Step aside." A few pedestrians slow, phones drift up, pretending to check time. The sunlight doesn't move. It hardens. Catherine exhales through her nose, the breath of a woman who has practiced not giving small men big victories. She shifts her weight, protective instinct drawing her palm over the curve of her belly. "Officer," she says quietly, "I'm going inside." Cornell laughs like it's a trick. "What are you, a judge?" Trent's thumb slides to her chin, claiming it as a lever. "You think the rules don't apply because you dressed for a magazine?" he murmurs, the smile sour. He tilts her face up, auditioning her for humiliation, then slams his palm across her cheek. The sound breaks the morning open. It ricochets off column and cornice and lands everywhere at once. The latte spills. The tie stops moving. A bailiff at the door forgets he was mid-sentence. Catherine's handbag slips from her wrist and kisses the step, a soft thud that resolves the echo like a period. She does not reach for it. She plants her feet, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the courthouse doors beyond Trent's shoulder, the place where a person's name becomes a record. The red of her dress deepens, or maybe the light does. On her cheek a flush blooms, hot, precise, and uninvited, a mirror of fabric and bloodline. It reads less like anger than warning, the kind that precedes a wave you think you can outswim. Cornell tightens around her forearm. "Don't elevate," he says, as if she were the one dragging the moment uphill. "You want to make this worse?" Catherine's jaw works once. She swallows the immediate words and keeps the important ones. "I would like to proceed to screening," she says, calmer than the stone underfoot. Trent glances over his shoulder at the lobby where a supervisor might appear if summoned. None does. He steps closer, voice dropping to the tone men use when they think privacy equals power. "Let me be clear," he says. "This is my building. My rules. You move when I say," he gestures, and the two junior officers from the door instinctively drift closer, forming a blue wall around a woman in red. The onlookers tighten into a ring, equal parts curiosity and contagion. Somewhere a clerk says, "Don't film that." But the sentence has no authority in a world where everything is content. Across the street, a sleek black Maserati idles at the curb, the paint swallowing light like a secret. Behind the tinted glass, Hobert Nelson watches with the kind of stillness men mistake for indecision. He removes his sunglasses, folds them one-handed, and sets them on the console with ceremony. His expression is unreadable because it is unwritten. The engine hums a steady, patient threat. He does not open the door. Not yet. Back on the steps, Cornell pivots Catherine toward the side lane. "You're done," he declares, as if declaring makes it true. "We can do this the easy way," Trent's fingers haven't left her face. He enjoys the permission he gives himself. He thinks power is how tightly a hand can close. Catherine lifts her eyes to his. They are not pleading. They are not afraid. They are terribly, terribly awake. "Remove your hand," she says. Something in her steadiness irritates him, flies in his drink. He clamps harder, like a child doubling down once the game starts to slip. "There it is," he says to no one. "The attitude. The entitlement. The junior officers are close enough now to smell the aftershave and the metal." One of them tucks his phone away, suddenly worried that documenting this might put his name on someone's desk. Another keeps filming, because he thinks the story will go the way stories always go. "Officer Trent," a bailiff calls from the threshold, cautious but not courageous. "What's the issue?" "Non-compliance," Trent replies, eyes never leaving Catherine. "Attempted bypass of a restricted zone. Possible counterfeit documents." The list is a staircase he's been down before. He knows every landing by heart. Catherine glances past him at the county seal above the door, the blindfolded figure, the balanced scales. She studies it the way some people study a sky before it breaks. It is an old habit. Orient to what's supposed to be true, even when something false is touching your face. The crowd calcifies into silence. Even the city slackens, listening. Catherine turns her head just enough to free her mouth from Trent's grip. When she speaks, it isn't a shout that bleeds energy into the air. It's a sentence crafted with the edge tucked inside. "You will take your hand off me," she says, "and you will let me walk into that building." Cornell's laugh tries to act brave. It sounds like cheap metal. "Lady, you don't get to tell us." The Maserati's engine note climbs half a measure, barely audible over the concrete. A cyclist at the corner glances up, feeling the same current a dog feels before thunder. Trent leans closer, the way men lean when they want to own a moment with their breath. "People like you," he says, "think you're above the law." Her cheek is still warm under his palm. The only thing rising is the red. Catherine's hands remain folded over her child, fingers interlaced like a prayer that doesn't need to be spoken to be heard. She is not trying to win the moment. She is letting the moment identify itself, so it will know where to report later. Behind glass, Hobert's thumb taps the wheel once. A man at his shoulder, clean-shaven, black suit, waits for the word that will turn a door handle into an event. Hobert gives no word. He watches. He measures. "Move," Cornell says, tugging. "Now." Catherine resists only with posture, an immovable courtesy. Her eyes drift to the phone cameras, to the clerk who has stepped halfway outside and cannot convince herself to step back in, to the bailiff who knows loose policy when he sees it. She catalogs witnesses, angles, the placement of the nearest security camera lens embedded in the cornice, the small arithmetic of survival. "Ma'am," the bailiff tries again, softer now. Let's just do our jobs," Trent finishes, as if the sentence belongs to him. His fingers slide back to the hinge of Catherine's jaw. Another centimeter, and he'll bruise her with the part of his hand the Union Handbook will call a miscalculated restraint. He enjoys the thought. The red on her cheek seems to brighten, the way color intensifies before a storm. Catherine tastes iron where tooth nicked lip. She doesn't show it. She lets the breath leave her lungs slowly. So slowly the pattern could be mistaken for surrender. Then she speaks, and the words are threaded with something so calm it should scare the right kind of man. "You'll regret that." Not shouted, not spat, laid down like a marker on a table everyone pretends isn't there. Trent blinks, surprised by the temperature of her voice. He doesn't remove his hand. Across the street, the sunglasses are no longer on the console. A door latch whispers. The Maserati's engine falls to a patient purr, as if saving something for later. On the step, the phones keep recording. The seal keeps glinting. The morning, having chosen its witness, waits. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe and like this video. It helps more people discover stories like this one. and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now take a deep breath, because what happens next will change everything. The marble floors inside the courthouse carried sound the way a confession carries guilt. Too clearly, too far. Catherine's heels clicked once, twice, before the noise was smothered by the officer's boots. Rogelio Trent led the procession, chin high, chest inflated. Jimmy Cornell stayed half a step behind, one hand clamped around Catherine's arm, as if guiding her through a crime scene instead of the very place designed to measure innocence. Two younger officers flanked them, pretending not to see how the cuffs dug into skin that shouldn't have been touched. It looked less like an escort and more like a parade. The crowd inside the lobby parted in slow ripples. Some onlookers whispered, others raised their phones. Blinking dots of light recording everything. A woman in a navy blazer, court clerk, mid-30s, paused mid-sentence as the group passed. Her mouth opened, closed. Haven't I seen her before? She couldn't place the face, only the poise. The red dress didn't wilt. It flared, brilliant, against the pale walls, a flag carried into enemy territory. Trent threw his voice like a baton. Step aside, people. Interference with an ongoing investigation is obstruction. His words had the rhythm of a man who'd said them too many times and never been contradicted. Cornell added a smirk. Suspect attempted unauthorized entry through front security. Claimed she was above screening. The younger officers laughed, a little too loudly, nervous about what they didn't understand. Catherine said nothing. She didn't stumble. She didn't look down. When Cornell jerked her forward, she simply adjusted her balance, spine straight, as if the cuffs were a misplaced accessory instead of an insult. At the security desk, Trent yanked open her handbag. Her phone clattered onto the conveyor tray. Her ID followed. He didn't glance at the name, though the letters, Hobert Nelson, were etched deep into the lamination. We'll hold these until we verify identity, he announced to no one in particular, but loud enough for the room to hear. Officer, Catherine said, calm and level, that's a private item. I'd like a receipt for my property. He barked a laugh that bounced off the ceiling. You'll get a receipt if you're cleared, sweetheart. The laughter from nearby uniforms spread like spilled ink. A bailiff, uncertain, muttered, maybe just take her statement, but Trent silenced him with a look. She's one of those charity wives, Trent muttered to Cornell as they moved her toward the hall leading to holding. You can tell by the shoes. Thinks having a kid in her belly makes her bulletproof. Cornell grinned, low and mean. Entitlement's a disease. I'll file her under social privilege gone feral. Catherine caught the words, of course. Every syllable lodged itself like a pin in velvet. She didn't speak. She kept her breathing measured, in through the nose, out through the mouth. The child shifted beneath her ribs, a small reminder of why restraint sometimes costs more courage than retaliation. They stopped before a wooden bench in the side corridor. Trent gestured to it with mock courtesy. Have a seat. You're not under arrest, but we're detaining you for questioning. Her wrists bore faint marks where metal met skin. She didn't sit immediately. Could I have a glass of water? She asked. And I'd like to speak with my attorney. Cornell leaned an elbow against the wall. You hear that, Rogelio? She's already lawyered up. Next, she'll ask for champagne. Trent chuckled. Ma'am, you're lucky we don't book you right now for obstruction. You're not owed anything but patience. Catherine studied him. Not the uniform, but the man beneath it. The creased forehead, the slightly shaking right hand. Arrogance trying to disguise adrenaline. He's nervous, she realized, because he doesn't know what he's touched. Water, please, she said again, softer this time. The repetition made it more powerful than insistence. Cornell's grin faltered for the first time. He looked away, muttering, Fine, I'll get it. When he returned, the paper cup was half filled and lukewarm. Catherine accepted it with a small nod. She didn't drink. She set it beside her, perfectly centered on the bench. Trent crouched in front of her, elbows on his knees. Here's what's going to happen. You'll stay put while we verify your information. If you cooperate, you walk out with an apology. If you don't, his eyes flicked to her stomach. You'll have a lot of explaining to do to your husband. That word, husband, hung between them like bait. Catherine met his gaze. You have no idea how right you are. Across the street, inside the Maserati, Hobert Nelson watched the courthouse doors swallow his wife. The glass showed his reflection layered over the columns, a double exposure of patience and promise. Sir? The man in the passenger seat, Eli Navarro, waited, hand near the radio. The security convoy idled a block back, 3 black SUVs holding men who could erase problems by noon. Hobert didn't look at him. His eyes tracked the faint shimmer of cameras flashing inside the lobby, the shape of his wife's red dress disappearing behind polished glass. She's inside, Eli said carefully. Orders? Hobert's phone buzzed once. He ignored it. The silence stretched long enough to make engines hum louder. Then finally he spoke. Not loud, not rushed, just deliberate. Don't move yet. Eli blinked. Sir, they struck her. I know. Hobert leaned back in the leather seat. And they're about to write their own obituary into a police report. He looked down at his phone screen. An incoming call from Judge Harding's office. He let it ring out. Let them hang themselves, he said, voice a shade colder. We'll collect the rope later. He tapped the console once, ending the discussion. The car settled into stillness again. Predator patience measured in seconds and heartbeats. Back inside, Trent was enjoying himself. He always enjoyed the part between control and consequence. Catherine sat quietly while he dictated a statement to a stenographer brought in for protocol. His words tumbled easily. Subject attempted to bypass metal detectors. Subject refused to provide identification. Subject resisted escort. Each lie stitched itself into the next, a fabric woven from practiced confidence. Cornell chimed in occasionally. She got mouthy. Claimed she had rights. The stenographer hesitated once. Do you want me to note that she's, expecting? Trent shrugged. If it helps the report look balanced. Catherine watched the keys clack under the stenographer's fingers. Each strike was another nail in a coffin that didn't belong to her. Still, she kept her silence. Patience, she reminded herself, is how lions wait for mistakes. When the paperwork ended, Trent turned to her. You're free to make a phone call. I'll wait, Catherine said. My husband's already on his way. He smirked. Oh, he is, huh? Let me guess. Some lawyer? A real estate guy with a good suit and a worse haircut? She looked at him, calm as rain before thunder. Something like that. Cornell laughed, tossing the file onto the desk. You're going to wish it was that simple, sweetheart. Trent leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. You know, most women cry by now. You don't even blink. Crying wouldn't suit the dress, Catherine said. And I don't waste tears on temporary people. For the first time, Trent's smirk faltered. He straightened, trying to recover authority. We'll see how temporary I am when the DA gets here. Indeed, she murmured. We will. Minutes passed. Outside, the hum of cameras had multiplied. Reporters smelled a story. Bailiffs whispered about suspension protocols. Clerks avoided the hallway entirely. One of them, the woman from earlier, found herself replaying the image of Catherine's face, the calm fury in her eyes, and realized where she'd seen her before. The charity gala last fall. The mayor's wife had introduced her as Mrs. Hobert Nelson. Her coffee cup slipped from her hand. Trent! She called toward the holding area, voice shaky. You might want to... He waved her off. Ma'am, please return to your station. The clerk backed away, heart hammering, whispering to another, They don't know who that is. Back in the Maserati, Hobert's phone lit again, this time a live feed forwarded from an internal camera near security screening. The footage showed his wife on the bench, unbroken posture, eyes lifted to nowhere. Around her, the officers laughed, paper shuffling like confetti. He exhaled through his nose, the breath of a man deciding the scale of response. "Eli," he said quietly. "Time?" 10:30. "Good," Hobert replied. "That's enough rope." In the courthouse, Trent leaned against the wall, arms folded. "You know, ma'am," he said, voice dripping with tired authority, "it's easier for everyone if you just admit what you were trying to do." Catherine met his stare without blinking. "And what was that?" He grinned. "Sneak into court. Cause a scene. Maybe cry discrimination to a few cameras." He gestured toward the hallway windows. "Lucky for you, you got an audience." "Unlucky for you," she said. "So did they." He frowned. "Excuse me?" But Catherine only smiled, small, serene, lethal. "You'll understand soon." The silence that followed was the kind that changes temperature. Somewhere beyond the marble, engines started. Across the street, doors opened on 3 black SUVs. The moment had finally begun to run out of rope. The holding room smelled like recycled air and arrogance. A single light buzzed overhead, flickering every few seconds, throwing fractured shadows over the beige walls. The temperature hovered somewhere between courthouse chill and interrogation heat, deliberately uncomfortable. Catherine Nelson sat in the center of it, her red dress a violent contrast to the colorless room. Officer Rogelio Trent pushed the metal chair toward her with the side of his boot. "Sit," he ordered, as if talking to a stray. When she didn't move immediately, he pushed again, the scrape of steel on tile slicing through the quiet. That wasn't a suggestion. Catherine looked at the chair for a long moment, then at him. Calmly, she lowered herself onto it, movements deliberate, dignified. Her wrists bore faint red marks where the cuffs had been too tight, but her posture remained regal. She rested both hands over the swell of her abdomen, protective, composed, the quiet defiance of a woman who refused to break in front of men who had already shown how small they were. Trent stood across from her, pacing in a slow half-circle like a dog circling prey it didn't understand. "You think that silence works on me?" he asked. "We've seen your type 100 times. The rich ones who think being polite makes them innocent." At the desk by the corner, Jimmy Cornell pretended to fill out intake paperwork, but the lens of his phone camera gleamed in his palm, angled toward Catherine. He'd already recorded her slap on the steps. Now he wanted the aftermath. "Hey, Raj," he said with a grin. "Make her say her name again." The mic didn't catch it last time. Trent's eyes narrowed. "Name." "Catherine Nelson." Her tone was measured, the same way surgeons count heartbeats before an incision. Cornell smirked. "Nelson, huh? Sounds familiar." Trent barked a laugh. "Yeah, like half the city. What are you, a councilman's wife? A banker's mistress? You dress like money but act like trouble." "I'm here for a property hearing," she said. He leaned in close enough that she could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "Not anymore, you're not." Catherine's gaze didn't waver. "You're making a mistake." "Oh, sweetheart," he whispered, mock sympathy curdling his tone. "That's what they all say before we book them." Cornell chuckled from the desk. "Should have gone with something original, lady." Catherine shifted slightly in her seat, folding her hands more firmly over her stomach. The gesture wasn't just protective, it was grounding. Her nails caught the faint glint of the light, perfectly manicured, untouched by fear. The calm in her eyes unnerved Trent more than any shouting could have. "Where's your lawyer now?" Cornell asked, leaning back. "Or maybe your husband? Betty's one of those golf club guys who'll beg us to make this go away." Catherine tilted her head, a faint smile playing at the corner of her mouth. "Something like that." Trent snorted. "You know what? Let's hold her till we confirm ID. Maybe overnight. The holding tanks could use some company." Cornell whistled low. "You're in luck, lady." "I hear the benches are comfortable, if you like concrete." Outside the room, footsteps passed. Lawyers, clerks, voices bleeding through the door. The courthouse went on pretending it was the center of order, while inside, Disorder paraded in uniform. Catherine stayed still. She studied the rust spots on the vent above her, the stains on the floor, the reflection of Trent's pacing in the one-way mirror. "Tell me," she said softly, "is this how justice looks to you?" Trent stopped. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just wondering," she said, "how men with badges measure fairness. Is it by noise?" He clenched his jaw, stepping closer. "Keep that attitude up, and you'll find out." At that moment, the door creaked open. A young clerk stepped in, clutching a clipboard like a lifeline. She couldn't have been more than 25. Nervous energy radiating from her like static. Her eyes darted from Trent to Catherine, then down to the intake form. She froze. Officer Trent?" she stammered. "Can I just, verify something?" Trent frowned. "Make it quick." The clerk swallowed. "This last name, Nelson," she hesitated, lowering her voice. "Ma'am, Nelson, as in Hobert Nelson?" Cornell snorted without looking up. "Who's that? Your tailor?" The girl paled further. "No, sir. I mean the Hobert Nelson. The businessman. The one with the city contracts?" Catherine met the clerk's eyes and smiled. A small, knowing curve of the lips. "You might want to tell your boss who he just arrested." The room went quiet. Even Trent's boots stopped squeaking against the tile. He blinked once, twice. "You're saying you're married to that guy?" "That guy," Catherine repeated, her tone smooth as glass. "Yes." Cornell laughed so hard he nearly dropped his phone. "Nice try. You expect us to believe the wife of Hobert Nelson walks in here alone, no escort, no security detail, and ends up in cuffs? That's a new one." Catherine's gaze sharpened. "You'll believe it soon enough." Trent waved a dismissive hand at the clerk. "You can go. We're busy dealing with a professional liar." The young woman hesitated, biting her lip. "Sir, maybe you should just—" "Out!" he barked. She left, shutting the door too quickly, the sound echoing like a warning that went unheard. Cornell returned to his paperwork, muttering, "Can't believe the nerve of some people." He checked the recording on his phone, smirking. "At least this'll make great training footage." How to handle difficult detainees. Catherine adjusted her posture, leaning back slightly. Her calm was surgical, practiced, and dangerous. "Officer Cornell," she said evenly, "does your department allow unauthorized recordings in custody?" He frowned. "Excuse me?" "Because that's what you're doing," she replied, nodding at the phone in his hand. "You might want to delete that before your captain sees it." Cornell chuckled. "Oh, sweetheart, you really think anyone's going to care?" Trent rolled his eyes. "Ignore her. She's trying to play smart." Catherine's reply came like the slow pull of a trigger. "No, I'm just trying to give you a chance to stop digging." Before Trent could answer, the intercom above the door buzzed, an electric crack that made everyone flinch. A burst of static followed, then a sharp voice. "Attention all units in holding sector, code red. Cease engagement. Repeat, cease engagement with subject. Subject is under federal VIP tag Alpha Cornell," froze mid-sentence. The pen slipped from his hand, clattering against the desk. Trent frowned, confusion etched across his face. "What the hell does that mean?" Catherine's eyes met his. "It means you're out of time." He pressed the intercom button. "Security, this is Trent. Clarify that code. VIP tag Alpha," came the reply. "Subject identified as under federal protection. Immediate compliance required." Cornell's jaw dropped. "That code's for... what? Senators? Foreign officials?" Trent shook his head, still refusing the truth. "Nice try," he said, voice hard but thinner now. "That code's for diplomats, not courtroom trespassers." The intercom crackled again, sharper this time. "All officers, stand down. Verification incoming. Do not proceed with detainment." Trent backed toward the desk, his authority bleeding out through the soles of his shoes. "This is some prank," he muttered, glancing at Cornell for backup. Has to be. Cornell didn't answer. He was staring at his phone screen, at a flood of incoming texts from the precinct group chat. Who detained the Nelson woman? Tell me this isn't true. Captain wants names now. The silence between them stretched thin. Catherine sat still, hands resting on her abdomen, eyes half-lidded as if in prayer. The red fabric shimmered under the fluorescent light, her calm filling the room like oxygen, pushing their panic to the edges. Outside, a bell rang in the lobby, a signal shift, procedural and mundane. But inside the holding room, it sounded like a countdown. Trent swallowed hard, his mouth dry. This doesn't mean anything, he muttered half to himself. Anyone can spoof a code. Catherine's smile deepened, almost tender. Then I suppose you'll enjoy finding out. He wanted to snap back, to bark another order, but the weight of the room had changed. The air itself felt heavier, weighting. Even the buzzing light above them steadied for the first time, casting everything in clarity. Cornell's phone vibrated again. One message, all caps. Stand down immediately. Federal liaison en route. Trent stared at it, pulse hammering in his throat. Catherine didn't move, didn't speak. She just watched them both, two men unraveling in the quiet she had built around herself. And somewhere beyond the courthouse walls, a black Maserati's engine started. In the courthouse security office, the air was no longer routine, it was panic in a uniform. Screens flickered with security feeds from every hallway, each showing fragments of red dress and frightened faces. Officer Matthews, the youngest of the team, had been the one to verify the alert code. Now he stood frozen in front of his monitor, his mouth dry, eyes widening at what the screen told him. "Sir," he whispered, throat locking mid-word. "You need to see this." The security chief, a broad man named Lieutenant Harris, pushed away from his desk and crossed the room, the floor creaking under his weight. "If this is another prank code, I swear—" He stopped when he saw the screen. The words burned in bright government blue. Federal VIP tag Alpha. Catherine Nelson, spouse of Hobert Nelson. Active protection status. Authorized by federal congressional liaison. For a full second, no one spoke. The hum of electronics was the only sound in the room. Then Harris inhaled, slow and deliberate, as though oxygen had turned toxic. "Holy God," he muttered. "You idiots cuffed her." Matthew swallowed hard. "What do we do, sir?" Harris's hand was already on the phone. "We fix this before the city explodes." He dialed the precinct captain directly, knuckles white around the receiver. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered, "Captain Reynolds?" Harris didn't waste a second. "Sir, you need to authorize immediate release. The woman Trent and Cornell detained. Her name is Catherine Nelson." There was silence, heavy and absolute. Then 3 words, sharp as glass. "Release her." Now Harris exhaled shakily. Understood. But the relief never came. Because when he turned to the wall of monitors, the relief was already obsolete. Outside, the feed from the north entrance flickered to life, and every head in the room turned toward it. 3 black SUVs were pulling up to the courthouse steps, sleek, unmarked, and deliberate in their formation. Between them, like a shadow cutting through sunlight, rolled a black Maserati. "Sir," Matthews breathed, "he's here." Harris stared at the screen, the realization curdling into dread. Oh no. It's already too late. Downstairs in the holding area, Catherine sat exactly as she had before, still poised, hands folded over her abdomen. The paper cup of water rested beside her on the bench, untouched. The clock above the door ticked with merciless precision, each second drawing a line toward inevitability. The officers hadn't spoken for several minutes now. Trent stood near the door, pretending to scroll through his phone, but his face had lost its color. Cornell's earlier smirk had dissolved into something smaller, almost fear, though he wouldn't name it. From the intercom, static popped again. The same voice from before returned, clipped and urgent. "All units, stand by. The subject's husband has arrived on site. Repeat, Hobert Nelson is on courthouse property. Trent's jaw tightened. That's impossible, he muttered. There's no way. Catherine's eyes flicked toward him. There's always a way, she said softly. Outside, the scene had transformed in seconds. Reporters who had gathered after the earlier scuffle now sensed a bigger story. Cameras swung toward the street as the black convoy glided to a stop. Doors opened in synchronized motion. Men in suits, tall, quiet, and heavily built, stepped out first, scanning the perimeter with sharp precision. They didn't wear badges, but their presence carried a higher authority than any uniform could project. Then, from the Maserati, Hobert Nelson stepped out. He moved slowly, unhurried, as though the entire world were waiting for him. And perhaps it was. The midday sun cut a silver edge along his suit jacket. His sunglasses caught the glare for a moment before he slid them off and folded them neatly into his breast pocket. His face was calm, too calm. He didn't look angry. He looked like a man who had already decided what would happen. A courthouse marshal tried to approach. "Sir, this area is restricted." Hobart's gaze shifted toward him, and the marshal stopped mid-sentence, backing away without knowing why. It wasn't fear, it was gravity. Hobert Nelson had that effect. People just moved. He adjusted his cufflinks and began walking toward the main doors. Behind him, his men followed, spreading like a silent tide. The journalists hesitated only for a second before the shouting began. "Mr. Nelson, is it true your wife's been detained?" "Sir, are you pressing charges against the department?" "Mr. Nelson, was this an assault?" He said nothing. The sound of his shoes on marble drowned out every question. Inside, Harris was barking into the intercom. "Trent, Cornell, stand down. Do not engage. I repeat, do not." Static swallowed the last word. Catherine glanced at the clock again. 11:47. The silence in the holding room had thickened into something suffocating. "Why are we still here?" Cornell muttered under his breath. "If that code was real, it's not real," Trent snapped, though his voice trembled. "She's bluffing. Nobody like him gets federal protection." "Maybe not," Catherine said, eyes on the clock, "but he doesn't need it." The door handle twitched, every head turned. In the lobby, chaos began to fold into order, the kind of order that feels like fear. The usual buzz of courthouse chatter went mute as Hobert entered the building. The click of his shoes echoed through the rotunda. Lawyers stopped mid-conversation. Officers straightened instinctively, not because they were trained to, but because some part of their biology recognized power when it walked into the room. He didn't hurry. Each step was deliberate. The marble floor mirrored him perfectly. Black on white. Calm against chaos. A bailiff tried to speak. "Mr. Nelson, the courtroom's closed to the public right now." "I'm not the public," Hobert said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried, smooth as silk over a blade. The bailiff froze. At the security desk, Lieutenant Harris nearly tripped over himself reaching for the phone. "This is Harris. Get me Judge Harding now," he shouted. "He's in the building." "Who's in the—" came the confused reply before Harris cut the line. He looked back at the monitor showing the holding room. Catherine was still seated, serene as ever. Trent and Cornell looked like men awaiting execution. Harris muttered to himself, "If he gets to that room before we clear her—" He didn't finish. Everyone knew the end of that sentence. Outside the holding area, the sound of footsteps approached, measured, steady. Trent's voice cracked. "Who's that?" Catherine didn't answer. She was watching the door handle, a faint smile on her lips. Cornell whispered, "She knows." The door opened, not quickly, not violently, just with quiet certainty. A federal agent stepped inside first, badge raised. "All officers stand down." "Subject is cleared under federal authority." Trent exhaled with relief, until the second man entered behind the agent. He wore no badge, carried no weapon. He didn't need to. Hobert Nelson filled the doorway, like the end of a sentence no one wanted to finish. His eyes scanned the room once, His wife, the officers, the papers on the desk, the phone still recording, and then returned to Catherine. For a long moment, no one breathed. She met his gaze, calm and unbroken. "You took your time," she said. He smiled faintly, stepping closer. "I wanted them to think they had control." Trent stumbled backward. "Sir, we didn't know." Hobert's eyes slid toward him. "You didn't ask." The agent cleared his throat. "Mr. Nelson, the situation's contained." "We're escorting your wife out now." Hobert nodded once. "No. She walks out on her own." The agent hesitated, then stepped aside. Catherine rose, smoothing the red silk over her stomach, each motion slow, deliberate. She reached for the door, passing the officers who still hadn't moved. Before leaving, she paused beside Trent. "Next time," she said softly, "try touching something less dangerous." Trent's mouth opened, but no sound came. As the door shut behind her, the holding room exhaled, like the building itself had been holding its breath. In the lobby, the world had already changed. Reporters stood silent, cameras aimed. The courtroom staff, the clerks, even the judges on recess, all turned as Catherine Nelson, escorted by her husband, crossed the marble floor. No handcuffs, no shouting. Only the faint click of her heels echoing like punctuation at the end of a story that wasn't finished yet. And somewhere in the crowd, someone whispered what everyone else was thinking. The man who controls half the city's underworld just walked into its heart. The courthouse would never forget the silence that followed. The courthouse doors didn't open. They parted, like they understood who was on the other side. A slow, heavy silence swept through the chamber as Hobert Nelson stepped in. The sound of his shoes against marble was deliberate, each step its own sentence, punctuating the fear already tightening every throat in the room. He was dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that looked sculpted rather than sewn. The faintest glint of a silver watch peeking from beneath his cuff. No badge, no insignia. Yet his presence carried authority more binding than law. He didn't scan the room. His eyes found Catherine instantly and didn't leave her. Everything else, officers, cameras, judges, gawkers, ceased to exist. The red of her dress caught the light as she turned toward him, calm as a flame that knows exactly how far it will spread. Across the aisle, Rogelio Trent stiffened. His training screamed threat assessment while his instincts whispered, "Run." His hand moved reflexively toward the holster on his hip, fingers grazing the grip. But before the motion even finished, 3 of Hobert's men, black suits, expressionless, materialized from behind him like ghosts that had been waiting for permission. One man placed a single hand on Trent's wrist. No force, no violence, just gravity made human. The gun never cleared the holster. Another officer's sidearm disappeared in the same heartbeat. The room didn't erupt. It collapsed into silence. Judge Harding, seated above the chaos he no longer commanded, fumbled with his glasses. What is the meaning of this? Security?" Hobert didn't even glance at him. His attention belonged solely to Catherine. He walked past the frozen officers, past the gaping reporters, past the clerks who couldn't decide whether to film or pray. The air seemed to move around him, parting to make space the way water does for a ship it knows it can't resist. When he reached her, he stopped close enough for his shadow to fall across her face. His hand came up slowly, gently, as if afraid of the damage he might find. He brushed his thumb against the faint red mark on her cheek. The echo of Trent's arrogance. "You're trembling," he said quietly, voice like a knife wrapped in velvet. Catherine met his eyes. "No," she whispered. "They are." And she was right. Cornell's legs had begun to shake so visibly that the other officers edged away from him, as though guilt were contagious. Trent's jaw flexed. His hand twitched uselessly at his side, stripped of authority and weapon alike. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence, louder now, mocking the absence of courage. Hobert turned from his wife to face the room. His expression didn't change. "Which one of you," he asked softly, "touched my wife?" No one answered. There was only the sound of a clock ticking somewhere near the bench, the kind of rhythm that turns seconds into a slow execution. Judge Harding found his voice again, thin and breaking. "Mr. Nelson, this is a court of law. You can't just—" "Can't?" Hobert interrupted. The word curved into something almost curious. He reached inside his jacket, slow and smooth, and withdrew a sealed black envelope. The material caught the light, thick, deliberate, official-looking, in its quiet menace. He placed it on the judge's bench with the same gentleness one might use to set down a loaded gun. "Then follow your procedures, Judge," he said. "Start with this." Harding hesitated. The envelope sat there between them like a living thing. "What is this supposed to be?" "Documentation," Hobert said. "Names, payments, recordings." He glanced briefly at Trent, whose face drained of the last remaining color. "You'll find that your officer's definition of law enforcement has been quite creative." The judge looked at the envelope as though it might burn through the wood. His trembling fingers hovered over it, but didn't touch. "You're implying corruption in my courthouse?" "I'm implying nothing," Hobert said softly. "I'm proving it." The murmur that followed wasn't sound. It was movement. Reporters shifting forward, cameras clicking, pens scratching against paper. Everyone knew this was history in real time. Judge Harding cleared his throat. "You have no authority here, Mr. Nelson." Hobert tilted his head slightly, almost pitying. "And yet, here I stand." He took a step closer to the bench, the distance between them shrinking until the judge had to look up to meet his gaze. "The authority you speak of," Hobert continued, "only works when people still believe in it. But today, Judge, everyone in this building just watched two of your officers lay hands on a pregnant woman in public. Your law lost its audience the moment it laughed." A sound broke the silence. Trent, unable to hold it in any longer. "You can't threaten us like this," he shouted, voice cracking. "We were doing our jobs." Hobert turned toward him, slowly, deliberately. "Is that what you call it?" he asked. "A job?" Cornell tried to back him up, stammering. "She resisted. We thought—" "You thought," Hobert repeated, the syllables stretched to a whisper. "And in your thinking, you forgot that every man answers to something. Even you." He walked toward them, unhurried. The men in suits stepped aside automatically, giving him clear passage. When he stopped in front of Trent, he was close enough that the officer could see his own reflection in Hobert's eyes. "What's your name?" Hobert asked. "Officer Trent," he said, voice barely audible. "Good. Remember it," Hobert said. "You'll be hearing it again when you're asked to testify about the money you've been taking." Trent's breath caught. "What?" Hobert raised a finger. "Don't lie." "Not here. Not today." He turned back toward the bench. "Judge, if you'd open that envelope, you'll find transaction records, body cam footage conveniently erased from official logs, and wire transfers from accounts traced to your precinct." All time-stamped Harding's face had gone the color of chalk. He nodded at the bailiff, who reluctantly tore the seal and began unfolding the papers. His eyes scanned the top sheet, then widened. These are internal accounts. How did you—" Hobert's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You'd be surprised how much information a city gives away when it's trying to hide it." Cornell's breathing turned shallow. "This is insane," he muttered. "None of this can hold up in court." "It doesn't need to," Hobert said. "It just needs to hold up in public." The reporters pressed closer, flashes strobing the room. The judge's gavel trembled in his hand but never struck. The sound of authority had left the building. Catherine hadn't moved through any of it. She stood just behind her husband, her face calm, unreadable. Only her eyes told the story, watchful, almost sorrowful, as if she pitied the men who had no idea what their arrogance had cost them. Hobert glanced over his shoulder at her, then back to the bench. "We'll be leaving now," he said. Judge Harding's lips parted, a protest half formed. "Mr. Nelson, there are still procedures to—" Hobert's tone dropped, soft but final. "Then follow yours." "I already have," he turned, extending a hand toward Catherine. She took it without hesitation. Together they moved toward the doors, the crowd parting like a tide around them. As they passed Trent and Cornell, Hobert paused just long enough to let his words land like a sentence carved in stone. "Gentlemen, remember today. You thought power meant a badge. You'll spend the rest of your lives learning what it actually is." The doors swung shut behind them, the echo rolling through the courthouse long after their footsteps faded. Inside, Judge Harding looked down at the black envelope again, the edges now smudged with sweat. The pages it contained fluttered slightly under the air conditioning, whispering the same truth that hung over every man in that room. The law had just been reminded who really enforced it. For a moment, no one in the courtroom breathed. The black envelope sat on Judge Harding's bench like an accusation with a pulse. Its glossy surface caught the light from the stained glass windows, reflecting a distorted patchwork of color across the marble floor. The bailiff hesitated, glancing at the judge, then at Hobert Nelson, whose expression remained carved from calm authority. Finally, Harding gave a reluctant nod. "Open it," he said quietly. The bailiff peeled back the seal. The sound, paper tearing against glue, was louder than it should have been. From inside, he withdrew a thick stack of documents, neatly organized and bound with black ribbon. Then came photographs, surveillance stills of officers exchanging envelopes in parking lots, grainy shots of badge flashes beside unmarked vans, and ledgers filled with columns of numbers written in the steady hand of corruption. Gasps rippled through the room like wind over dry grass. Judge Harding's glasses slipped down his nose as he scanned the first few pages. The deeper he read, the paler he became. "These—" He looked up, voice trembling. "These are internal department logs." "They are," Hobert said evenly. "Each signed and time-stamped, cross-referenced with your precinct's official financial records. A curious thing, Judge. Half your men seem to earn twice their salary through channels that don't exist." The district attorney's assistant seated near the front row had been typing notes into a tablet. Now her fingers froze. Her eyes darted down one page, then another. A name appeared. Richard Vaughn, her superior. Her breath caught audibly. "Oh my God," she whispered. Reporters leaned forward, cameras whirring softly. Judge Harding shuffled to another section, reading aloud now as if saying the words might make them less real. "Payments from a construction consortium, a freight company in New Jersey, offshore transfers routed through shell accounts in the Caymans." He turned another page and stopped. "There's a list of officers here. Officers under my jurisdiction." Hobert's eyes were steady. "Every one of them took money from syndicates they were supposed to dismantle. Some of those payments came from your own courtroom staff." The assistant DA pressed a hand to her mouth. "Sir, these are dated last month. These can't be old records." "They aren't," Hobert said. "I prefer my information fresh." Trent made a strangled noise. "That's fabricated," he barked. "You can't just—" Catherine's voice cut through the air before her husband could answer. "You called me a criminal," she said softly. Her tone wasn't raised, but the stillness it carried drew every gaze. "You mocked me for walking into a courthouse, the place I believed was meant for truth. And all the while, you were selling pieces of this city to the same men who poison it." Trent tried to meet her eyes but couldn't. The strength in her composure made him shrink in ways no weapon could. Catherine took a slow step forward, her red dress whispering across the polished floor. "You humiliated me in public," she continued. "You said people like me think we're above the law. But it seems you never believed in law at all, only in who could pay more to pretend they were untouchable." The courtroom was silent except for the faint clicking of cameras. Judge Harding cleared his throat again as though sound could reassert control. "Mr. Nelson," he said. Where did these documents come from? Hobert turned to face him fully. From the same precinct I once funded, he said. 2 years ago, I donated nearly $8 million to support police reform programs, new equipment, community projects, better pay for honest men. He glanced toward Trent and Cornell. Instead, that money was laundered through middlemen into the pockets of my competitors. The same syndicate these officers pretend to fight. His eyes swept across the room, sharp and unblinking. These men aren't officers, he said, his voice low and deliberate. They're liabilities. They trade their oaths for cash and their badges for contracts. Cornell stammered, You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about, Hobert replied, because I followed every dollar. And every one of those dollars led back here, to this building, to this courtroom. To you, he looked at the judge again, his tone calm but absolute. This isn't revenge, Your Honor. This is arithmetic. You can't balance the books when half your numbers are lies. Judge Harding's knuckles whitened as he gripped the bench. These are serious allegations, he said finally, his voice trembling. If what you're saying is true, this court has an obligation to act, Hobert finished for him. Yes, Judge. And quickly reporters began whispering to one another, their pens scratching furiously. One woman near the front whispered, He's got them dead to rights. In the corner, the assistant DA's phone began to vibrate. She glanced at the screen, messages stacking one over another. Do not speak. Get out of the room. The story's already breaking. Her face drained of color. Judge Harding looked down again at the papers, flipping rapidly now through the pages like a man searching for an exit. There are signatures, he murmured. So many signatures. Yes, Hobert said. People always sign their guilt. They just call it paperwork. Trent, unable to hold himself back, lunged forward. You planted this, he shouted, veins standing out on his neck. This is your game, your setup. You think you can frame real cops and walk out clean? Hobert turned to him with quiet precision. You framed yourself when you decided justice was optional. Enough! The judge shouted suddenly, slamming his gavel. The sharp crack silenced everything. His voice shook, but tried to sound commanding. This court will order an immediate investigation. Officer Trent, Officer Cornell, you are to remain in custody pending inquiry. Trent's eyes went wide. You can't be serious. Harding's gavel came down again. Bailiff, disarm and detain both officers for questioning. The two men looked around, desperate for allies, but found only faces retreating from them. The bailiffs stepped forward, hands resting on holsters, not threatening, just ready. Cornell backed away, shaking his head. This isn't happening. Oh, it's happening, murmured one of the reporters, and the whole city's watching. Outside, through the tall glass windows, the flash of cameras multiplied. The courthouse steps had become a battlefield of microphones and questions. Every news outlet in the city had caught wind of what was unfolding inside. Hobert turned to Catherine. You see, he said quietly, you don't raise your voice to expose corruption. You simply open the right envelope. Her eyes softened for a brief moment as she looked at him. You didn't have to do this, she said. Yes, he replied. I did. Because they thought they could humiliate you in public and bury the evidence in private. Judge Harding rubbed his temples, the weight of what he'd seen pressing down like a confession. Internal affairs will take over from here, he said. The press will need a statement. Hobert nodded toward the gallery. Then you'd better make sure it's the right one. The bailiffs led Trent and Cornell toward the exit. Their uniforms, once armor, now looked like costumes stripped of meaning. Cameras flashed as the doors opened, spilling light over their faces, white, frightened, and unrecognizable. Catherine watched them go without triumph. You should have stopped when you still could, she said softly, almost to herself. The judge gathered the scattered papers, stacking them like broken promises. His hand trembled as he addressed the court. These proceedings are adjourned, pending federal review. Hobert placed a steady hand on Catherine's back. guiding her toward the doors as the sound of chaos erupted behind them. Reporters shouting, cameras clicking, the echo of crumbling authority filling the once sacred hall. As they stepped into the sunlight, Catherine paused at the top of the stairs and turned back once. The courthouse loomed behind her, the same building that had caged her hours ago. Now it stood as the scene of its own unmasking. She whispered, almost to the wind, "Justice doesn't shout. It reveals." Then she took Hobert's hand, and together they descended into the storm of cameras below. The first thing anyone heard was the sound, a single hollow crack that echoed through the courthouse security room like a gunshot. It wasn't gunfire, it was a slap. The same one that had turned a quiet morning into an international headline. The room was dim, except for the glow of monitors. On one screen, Catherine Nelson stood at the courthouse steps in her red silk dress, poised and silent. Officer Rogelio Trent's hand flashed across the frame, striking her cheek. She didn't flinch. The camera's microphone caught the gasp of onlookers, the cruel laughter of officers, and then the silence that followed. Across the room, one of Hobert's men, Silas Moretti, hit play again. The sound filled the air, louder this time. Even the reporters who had sneaked in fell quiet. On the split screen beside it, another feed showed the moment Hobert entered the courthouse, calm, commanding, the kind of silence that carried more power than violence ever could. The footage needed no commentary. It told its own story. "Make sure every outlet gets it," Hobert said, his tone cold and measured, full resolution. "No edits, yes, sir," Silas replied. He connected the drives, uploading the footage to multiple encrypted servers. Within minutes, major networks and social media feeds began lighting up across the city. The headline spread faster than wildfire. Courthouse assault on pregnant woman. Police under fire. By noon, the courthouse looked like the center of the world. Satellite vans lined the streets. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder, microphones raised, voices competing against the roar of generators and helicopter blades. Police barricades barely held the crowd back. Protesters waved homemade signs reading "Justice for Catherine" and "End the badge corruption." Inside the district attorney's office was chaos. Phones rang nonstop. Lawyers barked into headsets. Someone shouted, "It's everywhere! CNN, Reuters, even the BBC's running it!" The footage looped on every monitor in the building. Catherine, silent and dignified, standing her ground while two uniformed officers ridiculed her. Then, cut to Hobert's entrance. The transition was cinematic. Humiliation giving way to retribution, injustice to inevitability. The visual contrast was too powerful to ignore. Within an hour, the video had amassed over 10 million views online. Comment sections filled with outrage. "This woman's strength is unreal. She didn't even raise her voice. The law failed her, but she didn't break." It wasn't just a story anymore. It was a movement. Catherine watched from the back of the courthouse lounge, the sound muted, but the images relentless. Her reflection in the TV glass seemed to belong to someone else, someone stronger, colder. "Do you regret it?" Hobert asked quietly, seated beside her. "Regret what?" "Not fighting back." She shook her head. "If I had, they'd have called it resistance. This way they can't rewrite it." Her words carried the kind of wisdom born from pain, and the world was finally listening. Through the window behind them, chants from protesters drifted upward. "Justice for Catherine! Clean the courts!" Hobert's phone buzzed on the table. A single encrypted message flashed on screen. No name, only an insignia. A black chess knight. He frowned, unlocking it. The message was brief, written in code he didn't need decrypted. The pawns moved just as planned. "Valenti watches. He expected your rage, not your silence." Hobert exhaled slowly. His jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "Don Valenti." Catherine looked over. "The rival boss?" He nodded. "The same." He's been bleeding influence since the hearings. This, he gestured to the TV, was his play. He wanted me angry, sloppy, a reaction he could exploit. She tilted her head. And instead, he allowed himself the smallest hint of a smile. Instead, we gave him theater. He leaned back, watching the screen. Trent's slap replayed for the 100th time, every pixel of it dissected by talking heads and experts. They wanted a war, Hobert said softly, his tone like steel cooling after fire. We'll give them a scandal instead? At that very moment, across the city, Don Valenti sat in his penthouse office surrounded by smoke and television light. His lieutenants hovered nearby, watching the same footage on a massive screen. Unbelievable, one muttered. He turned the whole city against the police. Valenti crushed his cigar against the ashtray, eyes narrowing. He turned the police against me, he hissed. That wasn't supposed to happen. He stood, pacing slowly. I wanted outrage, blood, the kind of chaos that erases names. But now she's a saint, and he's a strategist. He looked up at the screen again, at Catherine's calm face frozen mid-frame. They made her untouchable. Back at the courthouse, Hobert's men coordinated like a private intelligence team. The footage had spread globally now. France, Italy, Japan. News anchors called it the moment dignity met corruption. One reporter outside spoke into her camera, voice trembling with emotion. This footage, this moment, has ignited protests in 3 cities already. What began as an assault in one courthouse has become a national reckoning. Catherine Nelson's quiet endurance has become the symbol of justice millions feel they've been denied. Behind her, crowds chanted. Signs rose higher. Someone projected Catherine's image onto the courthouse facade. A living mural of resilience. Inside, Hobert turned to his right-hand man, Silas. What's the status on Trent and Cornell? Internal affairs took them. Cameras caught their escort. Public opinion's already buried them. Good, Hobert said. Now make sure the footage stays public. Every copy backed up in 12 different places, Silas nodded. And Valenti? Hobert's eyes darkened, but his voice didn't rise. Valenti just learned the most important rule of power, he said. You can't kill what the world is watching. Catherine rose from her seat, crossing the room to the window. The city outside looked different now. Angrier, but alive. She could see banners waving through the smoke. Faces turned upward. They think I'm brave, she murmured. But I'm just tired. Hobert joined her, his hand finding hers. Bravery isn't loud, he said. It's standing still when everyone wants you to fall. She smiled faintly. You sound like my grandfather. He was a smart man. I never told you what he said before he died, she added quietly. He told me, in this world, reputation is armor. Wear it or bleed. Hobert's lips curved into a rare, genuine smile. Then today, you're wearing steel. By sunset, the courthouse plaza had transformed into a sea of humanity. Reporters broadcast live segments while drones hovered overhead. Chanting filled the streets. Flowers and candles lined the steps where Catherine had been struck. A woman placed a sign at the base of the stairs. It read, "They slapped her." She woke us. The city's skyline shimmered in gold light as the sun fell behind it. Catherine and Hobert stood near the top of the courthouse steps, the wind tugging at her dress. She looked down at the crowd, her expression a quiet mix of sorrow and strength. Hobert spoke softly beside her. Valenti wanted blood in the streets. Instead, he's getting headlines and hearings. She nodded. And you? I'm getting something rarer, he said. Time. While they scramble to manage outrage, I'll find out who took the first bribe and who signed the last check. Her eyes stayed on the crowd below. What happens when you find them? He looked at her, his voice low and deliberate. Then justice gets personal. A flashbulb went off below. Catherine's face illuminated in perfect stillness. Hobert beside her, the courthouse looming behind. The image spread within minutes, sealing the legend, the woman in red who stood silent under humiliation, and the man who made the world listen. And somewhere, far from the crowd, Don Valenti poured another drink, staring at the screen with a bitter smile. "She thinks she's justice," he murmured. "Let's see how long justice survives when the cameras turn off." The same courthouse that had once echoed with arrogance now hummed with cameras, microphones, and the restless energy of reckoning. Overnight, footage had spread beyond borders, igniting a national conversation that no press release could contain. Political commentators, faith leaders, and citizens alike spoke the same word with equal disbelief: corruption. And now, one by one, the pillars began to fall. The police chief's resignation came first. He stood before a wall of cameras, the gold insignia on his uniform stripped bare. "Effective immediately," he said, voice cracking under the weight of his own cowardice. "I am stepping down." The words were meant to sound noble. They didn't. As he walked away from the podium, internal affairs officers stepped forward, not for applause, but for arrest. A warrant had been waiting, sealed until that very morning. The charges: obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and the systematic cover-up of officer misconduct. The crowd erupted, not in shock, but in vindication. By midday, 7 more officers were led out in cuffs, men who had worn the same badge that Trent and Cornell had stained. The news crawls on every channel told the same story. The Nelson case breaks the department open. For the first time in decades, the uniform meant accountability instead of power. In a small interrogation room, Rogelio Trent sat slumped over a metal table, the sound of air conditioning louder than his breathing. His hands trembled, not from guilt, but from the hollow realization that the system he'd relied on had vanished. Across from him, an internal affairs officer clicked a pen. "Do you have anything to say before we proceed?" Trent's voice was hoarse. "I didn't know who she was." The officer didn't look up. "You didn't need to." Next door, Jimmy Cornell wasn't faring better. His arrogance had collapsed into pleading. "Please," he said to the camera recording his deposition, "I was following orders. We thought she was—" But no one wanted to hear excuses. The city didn't care for motives anymore, only consequences. Meanwhile, Hobert Nelson sat in his office overlooking the skyline, the weight of victory pressing heavier than defeat ever had. On one wall, muted news broadcasts replayed the arrests. He watched without satisfaction. Silas entered quietly. "Trent and Cornell are requesting leniency," he said. "They've offered statements against Valenti's people. They're afraid for their lives." Hobert didn't look away from the screen. "Afraid," he repeated softly. The irony. Silas hesitated. "What do you want me to do?" Hobert took a slow breath. "Nothing," he said finally. "They wanted mercy from the man they tried to provoke. Let them find it in the system they swore to uphold." Silas frowned. "So, no retaliation?" "No," Hobert said, his voice calm but heavy. "Violence is temporary. Exposure is forever." He turned toward the window where protesters filled the streets below. "They tried to humiliate my wife," he murmured. "Now they'll live their lives explaining why they failed." 2 weeks later, the Nelson inquiry began. A televised hearing streamed live across the nation. Rows of press, attorneys, and citizens filled the grand hall. Every word, every breath would be preserved in history. At the center of it all sat Catherine Nelson, radiant in a tailored white dress that seemed to catch the light rather than reflect it. There were no tears, no bitterness, only that calm, unflinching composure the world had come to revere. The committee chair cleared his throat. "Mrs. Nelson," he said, "you've been granted the floor." She stood, her every movement deliberate. The camera zoomed in, catching the faint curve of her pregnancy beneath the fabric of her dress. She rested one hand gently against her abdomen as she began to speak. "When I walked into that courthouse," she said, her voice steady, "I believed in the system. I believed that law was meant to protect, not humiliate. that officers wore their uniforms to serve justice, not themselves. She paused, letting silence do its work. I was wrong, she continued, but not beyond repair. What happened to me wasn't just an act of cruelty, it was a reflection of what happens when institutions forget humanity, when power becomes a weapon instead of a responsibility. Cameras clicked in rhythm, capturing the poise of a woman who had turned pain into prophecy. I am not here to condemn, she said softly. I am here to remind. Because no nation survives on fear and silence, justice cannot be a privilege reserved for the powerful. It must be the birthright of every citizen. The room fell utterly still. Even the air seemed to hesitate. Catherine looked down for a moment, her hand still resting protectively on her stomach. In a few weeks, she said quietly, I will bring a child into this world. And I ask myself what kind of world that will be. Her voice trembled, not with weakness, but with emotion. No child, she said, should inherit a world where cruelty wears a badge. The words landed like a gavel, final, irrefutable. For a moment, even the reporters didn't move. Then, as if released from a spell, applause erupted, raw, uncoordinated, genuine. From the back of the hall, Hobert watched. He had faced senators, dons, and warlords, but never had he felt smaller than in that moment. Catherine's calm had done what all his power couldn't. It had turned a nation's anger into empathy. Silas leaned toward him. She's changing the narrative, he whispered. They don't see her as your wife anymore. They see her as a leader. Hobert's lips curved slightly. Good, he said, because the city needs her more than it needs me. He glanced at the screen behind the podium. Catherine's image broadcast to millions, and exhaled slowly. For once, he murmured, almost to himself, it's not about control. It's about redemption. By the end of the week, the fallout had reshaped everything. The precinct disbanded its command structure. Internal Affairs launched the largest corruption probe in city history. The mayor called for rebuilding from the ashes. But for the public, one symbol remained, Catherine. Her face appeared on murals, her words printed on posters, her calm defiance quoted in editorials. The nation had found its conscience in her silence, its strength in her restraint. That night, back at home, she stood on the balcony overlooking the city lights. The wind lifted her hair, carrying with it the faint sound of chanting from the streets. People still gathered, still awake. Hobert joined her, his arm wrapping protectively around her shoulders. You didn't just change the city, he said quietly. You redeemed it. She smiled faintly. No, I just reminded it what justice looks like when it stops shouting. Hobert studied her for a moment. Do you know what I realized today? What? He placed a hand over hers. It wasn't my influence that brought this city to its knees. It was your strength. Catherine looked at him, her expression tender but unwavering. Then let's make sure our child grows up in a city that knows the difference between fear and respect. Below them, the city glowed, not perfect, not pure, but awake. And for the first time in a long time, Hobert Nelson, ruthless, unshakable, feared, felt something he hadn't in years: hope. 6 months had passed, but the city still spoke her name. The courthouse steps, once the stage of humiliation and outrage, were now lined with red banners and white roses. A new bronze plaque gleamed beneath the morning sun, freshly unveiled for the cameras. The engraving read, "The Nelson Justice Center, dedicated to integrity, courage, and reform." Catherine stood before it, her crimson dress flowing like the echo of that infamous day. Beside her, Hobert Nelson adjusted his tie, the faintest smile softening the hard lines of his face. He looked less like the man who once commanded empires in the shadows, and more like someone quietly surrendering them to her. The crowd beyond the velvet ropes was massive. City officials, journalists, protesters turned supporters. and everyday citizens who had once doubted her. Flashbulbs popped like fireworks as the mayor took the podium, his voice amplified through the courtyard. 6 months ago, he began, this building symbolized everything broken in our system: arrogance, corruption, and the abuse of power. Today, it stands reborn, named for a woman whose strength reminded us what justice is supposed to look like. Applause thundered across the square. Catherine lowered her gaze briefly, humbled but resolute. The wind tugged gently at her hair, carrying with it the murmur of hundreds who whispered her name with reverence instead of pity. After the ceremony, reporters crowded around the couple as they entered the newly renovated lobby. The walls gleamed with marble and glass. The emblem of the old police division had been replaced by a simple inscription, "Truth is the highest law." Hobert walked slightly behind her, letting her lead. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Down the hall, a bronze plaque bore another name, the Catherine Foundation for Police Accountability. Funded by Hobert's $10 million endowment, the foundation had already begun offering grants for body cameras, whistleblower protections, and community reform programs. Its mission was simple: exposure through transparency, not violence. Inside the main atrium, children in school uniforms held up posters that read, "Thank you, Ms. Nelson." One of them, a girl barely 10, shyly approached her with a white carnation. "My mom says you made the police honest again," the girl said. Catherine knelt, smiling. "No, sweetheart," she said softly. "I just reminded them that honesty is louder than fear." The cameras captured the moment, and within hours, the image would circle the world. Catherine Nelson, in red, kneeling beside a child who believed in the future again. That evening, the story played on every television across the country. In a dimly lit prison cell, Rogelio Trent sat on the edge of his bunk, elbows on his knees, staring at the screen bolted to the wall. The flicker of light painted his face in shades of gray. On screen, Catherine stood before the courthouse steps, shaking hands with the mayor. Trent muttered something under his breath, part disbelief, part regret. In another cell across the facility, Jimmy Cornell watched the same broadcast. He'd aged years in months. His once pristine uniform replaced by orange cloth and restless silence. When the newscaster mentioned former officers Rogelio Trent and Jimmy Cornell serving concurrent sentences for civil rights violations and abuse of power, he looked away. The camera panned to their former captain testifying in a federal courtroom, his trembling hands clutching a Bible. "Yes," the man said under oath, "we covered up the complaints. We altered reports. We took bribes. I am cooperating for immunity." Trent stared blankly at the screen, his voice low and bitter. "Loyalty," he muttered. "Guess it's just another illusion." Cornell's jaw tightened. "No," he said, almost to himself. "It's karma." Back at the Justice Center, the evening sky turned gold, then crimson. The press event had ended, but one reporter lingered, microphone in hand. She approached Catherine as the crowd dispersed. "Mrs. Nelson," she said, her tone cautious, "after everything you've endured, the assault, the trials, the media, do you believe in forgiveness?" Catherine looked at her for a long moment. The question seemed to hang between them like a balance waiting for weight. Finally, she smiled faintly, the kind of smile that held history behind it. "Forgiveness?" she repeated. "Yes, I believe in forgiveness." She turned slightly, glancing at the building that now bore her name. "But forgetting?" She shook her head softly. "Never." The reporter lowered her microphone, words lost to the quiet conviction in that answer. Hobert stepped beside her, slipping his hand into hers. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His gaze said everything: pride, awe, and the quiet acknowledgement that, in the end, it wasn't his power that changed the city. It was her grace. Later that night, long after the cameras were gone and the speeches forgotten, Catherine walked the empty halls of the courthouse-turned monument. Her heels echoed softly against the marble floor. The walls, once cold and cruel, now glimmered under the warm light of chandeliers. She paused at the entrance to courtroom B, the same one where she had once sat handcuffed, accused, and humiliated. The bench where Trent had stood still bore faint scratches from his boots. Catherine traced her fingers along the wood and whispered, "Justice doesn't forget, either." From the window, she could see the reflection of the city outside, the lights glowing like constellations in motion. Somewhere down there, people were living in a world she helped change, not perfect, but fairer. At the Foundation's dedication gala a week later, speeches were shorter, smiles easier. Hobert gave only a brief remark before turning the stage over to Catherine. "I once thought justice was loud," she told the audience. "That it roared from courtrooms and echoed through headlines. But now I know. It's quiet. It lives in reform, in awareness, in every person brave enough to say enough." The audience rose in applause. Among them were journalists, reformers, and even a few officers wearing newly minted badges with the Nelson emblem engraved beneath the crest. The next morning, newspapers across the country carried the same photograph, Catherine Nelson in red, standing beneath the marble columns of the courthouse that once tried to break her. Her chin was lifted, her eyes clear, the bronze plaque behind her gleaming in the sunlight. For some, it was just another dedication photo. But for those who knew the story, it was an ending written in poetic justice. Trent and Cornell were forgotten footnotes. The Catherine Foundation was thriving, and the Nelson Justice Center stood as a symbol carved not by politics, but by principle. The world would remember that image. The woman in red beneath the pillars of power, no longer its victim, but its conscience. And as the morning light spread across the steps where it all began, one final line seemed to write itself in the silence. Justice wore red that day, and she never had to raise her voice. If this story has your attention, hit that subscribe button and let us know where in the world you're watching from. Every story we tell connects the past to the present, and we'd love to have you with us for the next one. Now let's continue the journey.